On a July morning in 1833, a crowd gathered on the edge of Morgantown, North Carolina. They were there to watch a girl get hanged. The girl being just 18 years old. Her name? Frances Silver. But everybody knew her as Frankie. She was small, blonde, and by all accounts, soft-spoken. But the state of North Carolina believed that she had murdered her husband brutally, and that belief was enough. They built a gallows behind the Burke County Jail. By midday, the heat was pressing down like judgment. Frankie climbed the steps. When the rope was placed around her neck, she didn't speak, didn't confess, didn't beg. Some say she was asked if she had any last words, and she muttered yes. But before she could say anything, her father, Isaiah, standing close by, hollered, "Die with it in ya, Frankie." Then the trap dropped, and with it, one of the oldest murder legends in North Carolina began. But the part that people forget is how much of it was real. It happened nearly 200 years ago, but in the hills of western North Carolina, it's still spoken. A girl, a cabin, a body burned in the hearth, and a silence that stretched from the gallows all the way into legend. Frances Stewart, known as Frankie, was born around 1815 in the rugged Tow River Valley of North Carolina. Her parents, Isaiah and Barbara Stewart, were poor mountain farmers. Scotch-Irish by blood, hard-working, close to the land. The Stewarts lived in what would later become Mitchell County, but back then it was part of Burke. Life was hard. Winter came early. Food was earned by axe and plow. And education was rare, especially for girls. Frankie likely never learned to read or write. Around 1830, when Frankie was just about maybe 15, she married a boy named Charlie Silver. Charlie, being around 16 or 17 at the time, came from a large family that lived just a few ridges over. There's not much known about their courtship, only that they were young and newlyweds and poor. They moved into a one-room cabin in the woods built by Charlie's daddy. Frankie tended the hearth and Charlie hunted the hills. And in November of 1830, they had a baby, a daughter that they would name Nancy. For a short while it might have been quiet, but the truth is, no one really knows what happens behind the cabin doors. And by the winter of 1831, something had already broken. It was December. Cold crept into the bones, the kind of chill that doesn't leave your joints. Frankie arrived at her father-in-law's, Jacob's, with baby Nancy in her arms. She told him that Charlie had gone hunting days ago, near the Tow River, and never came back. And at first Jacob believed her. Charlie was a hunter, and he would disappear often for days at a time. But those days turned to snow, and snow turned to silence. Neighbors soon grew uneasy, and when mountain folk feel uneasy, they go looking. An old man named Jack Collis was the first to get suspicious. He came to check the Silver cabin once he saw no one home. He saw smoke rising from the chimney, but the smell wasn't right. Not pine, not hickory, and the hearth was too clean. Collis looked closer, and in the ashes he found a bone, and not just one. Soon the neighbors arrived. They searched the house, the yard, the floorboards. They found blood soaked into the wood, and they looked under the floorboards to find a good-sized pool of blood. Also finding a patch of hair, flesh burned and charred, and part of a shoe that Charlie was known to wear. And in a hollow log near the edge of the trees, they found Charlie's head and torso. There was always conjectures as to whether Frankie had help in her decision, or whether she only had help in the activity after the murder. It is believed that her mother and brother helped her in the dismemberment and burning of Charlie, with the agreement that they were left out of it if she got caught. The stewards had not realized how difficult it would be to burn a whole body in a cabin fireplace, their calculations being way off. Frankie was arrested in January of 1832. Her mother, Barbara, and her brother, Blackston, were taken too, accused of helping her cover it up. But mountain people stick together. They're fiercely loyal. And if one got cut, they all bled. So Isaiah fought hard to help his family, even obtaining a habeas corpus, saying that his family was being illegally detained. And evidence didn't hold against him. They were released. Frankie wasn't. And she was just 16. Rumors soon spread like wildfire. Some said Frankie killed Charlie out of jealousy. Others, they said he was drunk, came home swinging, and that she was just trying to protect herself and their baby. Frankie's trial began in March of 1832 at the Burke County Courthouse. Lasting 2 days, there were no eyewitnesses, no clear motive, no confession, and Frankie herself never spoke because at that time the law didn't allow women to testify in their own defense. So all she could do was sit and listen. The prosecution claimed that she struck Charlie with an axe in a fit of rage. Sadly, under the law of that day, defendants were not allowed to take the stand in their own defense, but Frankie could have pleaded self-defense. But her attorney and father thought that the better way would be to have Frankie plead not guilty and make the state prove her guilt. Sadly, this was believed to be the fatal error that cost Frankie. However, there were many questions raised about Frankie's trial. The jury didn't need long. They found her guilty of first-degree murder. But after hearing all the witnesses and rehearing them, a lot of the testimony was changed, and sentiment for a pardon was growing. Her lawyer fought filing an appeal. The appeal was rejected. The judge sentenced her to hang, even after 7 members of the jury signed a petition asking the judge to issue a pardon. Judge, being from the mountains too, had the power to pardon Frankie, but apparently he was unmoved. Frankie's father fought hard for clemency, and so did her lawyers. Women from Burke County sent letters to the governor, but the execution date held. And that's when Frankie's dad and his brother broke Frankie out of jail. Many believe that her dad and brother had help from the inside. After all, 90% at least of the townspeople wanting Frankie to be pardoned. Frankie slipped out of jail, dressed in men's clothes, hair tucked under her wide-brim hat, and she went by Tommy. She didn't get far, though. One version says that her uncle gave her up by mistake. When asked if her name was Tommy, he nodded and said, "Yes, her name is Tommy." So she was captured, and the gallows were built. And so, on July 12th, 1833, the town gathered in Morganton to witness a first. Frankie Silver became the first white woman officially executed by the state of North Carolina. She was only 18. They say she wore a white dress, that she didn't cry, didn't speak. The ballad that's often called Frankie Silver's Confession wasn't written by her. It was published years after she died, and it's likely that she couldn't have written it even if she wanted to. When the noose was placed, it's said that she was asked if she had any last words. And that's when her father said those words. "Die with it in you, Frankie." And she did. Frankie was buried just west of town in an unmarked grave. In 1952, someone added a headstone. It spelled her name wrong. Silver's. Charlie Silver's remains were scattered. He was buried beneath 3 separate stones. And Nancy, their daughter, was raised by Frankie's parents, Isaiah and Barbara Stewart, in Franklin, North Carolina. But there are different legends and tales of who and where she was raised. But she lived a long life, married David Parker, and had 6 children. However, after 10 years of marriage, was devastated of her husband's death during the Civil War. It was then that she remarried a William Robinson and had a son that they named Commodore. Some say she never spoke about her mother. Maybe she didn't know what to say. But she passed in 1901 at the age of 70 and is buried in the Mount Grove Cemetery in Macon County, a long way away from her parents' graves. And one cannot help but think that if not for that tragic event on December 22nd of 1831, they might all be buried in the same cemetery on that tidy little hill in Kona. And that is the story of Frankie Silver, one that outlived her, still told in courthouse corners and quilt circles and at the kitchen tables, and passed from elder to child on mountain porches. It became a ghost story, a ballad, a stage play, and it grew like moss, half truth, half memory. The rest is what time, grief, and mountain myth laid over the bones of fact. What we do know is that Frankie Silver died with the truth still in her.